Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm kind of excited, and I'm actually very, very honored to be here. So I just want to start out with kind of a fun story I heard from Zig Ziglar a while back, right? So a woman meets with an attorney, and she says, I want to divorce my husband. And the attorney says, okay, fine. Let's start with a few questions. She says, well, like what? And he says, well, do you have any grounds? And she says, yeah, we've got about 5 acres out in the country. He says, well, no, I mean, do you have a grudge? She says, no, but we've got a nice wide carport and a storage shed. All right, let me ask this a different way. Do you have any complaints about him? She says, like what? He says, well, does he beat you up? And he says, no, I'm up at least an hour before him every day. Well, what about your role? Do you ever wake up grouchy? He says, no, when he's in a bad mood, I just let him sleep. And the attorney says, well, why exactly do you want to get a divorce? And she says, well, the guy just can't communicate. So communication. So Brian Tracy, does anybody know who this is? Okay, thank you. Back in the 80s, he was really strong. So when I started my corporate career, I began reading and listening to, CDs, tapes back in the 80s. That's what you got. We didn't get CDs right away. You're absolutely right. I think I was still into cassette tapes. We were past 8 tracks. But anyway, remarkable man who's been remarkably successful, and he just continues on. And he started the Focal Point coaching practice so that he could leverage him, right? He could only coach so many people. And so at the time I joined, there were 80 worldwide coaches, and I think there's close to 200 now that have been through the system, through the process, and using his systems and tools. All right, I'm going to go through this. This is me a while ago. But I am a certified professional analyst from behavior standpoint. When DISC is a behavioral assessment tool. And I'm a big fan of assessments. There are lots of great assessments. There's Kolbe, there's Enneagram, there's Myers-Briggs, any number of them. They're all really good. I just decided to get good at this one. All right, so when we talk about assessments, right, behavior models have been around for a long time because that's really what this is, right? 400 BC, right? And there's some different styles. The most recent one, if you went to, took psychology in school or anything, you probably heard about Carl Jung, and he's actually the forerunner for Myers-Briggs. William Marston is the guy who developed DISC, and back in 1924 he wrote a book called The Emotions of Normal People, because most psychology was about abnormal people, and then there's a vast majority of the rest of us. And he really came up with 4 different categories of activity that everybody has to deal with. We have to deal with problems, we have to influence others to our point of view, we have to deal with the pace of change, and we have to deal with rules and procedures set by others. We all have our own preferences as to how to do that, and I'm going to show you how that kind of works in a communication standpoint. Lots of companies use DISC, right? It's well known in lots of places. It's probably one of the older behavioral assessments out there, but lots of companies have used them, right? So Lee Iacocca, does anybody remember Chrysler and him essentially rescuing Chrysler at some point? Communication is everything. Communication, if you talk to CEOs from big companies and little companies around the world, you'll find that communication is like number 1, or at the very least number 2 of all of the challenges that they have. Communication. Okay, so let's talk about good ways to respond and bad ways to respond. Notice that the words is like the least important component of communication. Now the words are important. It's not like they're not important, but they're the least important. Tone is the second most important component. Because you can tell if somebody's raising their voice or talking very softly or whether they want to get your attention, that changes the communication of that particular statement. And then body language, amazingly enough, is 55%, the majority of it. So when I say body language, what are you guys thinking?
Facial expression.
Facial expressions. That's the magic word. You have been learning to read facial expressions since the day you were born. Right? Because your parents, you had to know whether they were kidding you or whether they were really upset or semi-upset or just sarcastic. Body language plays a huge role. What's the number 1 most generous thing you can do from a body language perspective? Absolutely right. Ta-da! You guys got it. So you know it. Smile. Smile. Smile more often. All right. So Peter Drucker, well-known business guru in many ways. He wrote In Search of Excellence and From Good to Great, and there's some really good stuff that he's written. It's about hearing what isn't being said, right? And that's something that's really important because it's not just the words, right? So the idea is to listen with our eyes. This is a really weird picture. Sorry about that. But again, when you talk about, and you guys have all, well, I won't make an assumption, but I active listening, is anybody familiar with that, right? So paying attention, fully focused. Active listening is listening with your eyes as well, seeing what's there to be seen. Okay, universal language. So everybody uses this language. This is what's really interesting. It's neutral, it's universal, but it's silent, it's quiet, right? So this is what you're going to gain by observation. So it's a lot more. So let me ask you a question. You're like, if you're focused on doing your thing and kind of listening to somebody else, are you fully engaged? Are you fully, right? That's not active listening, and you're going to miss stuff. I guarantee you're going to miss stuff. And I guarantee, one of the things that happens is the other person gets pretty disappointed that you're really not paying attention, right? And that's another component of generosity. Attention is a very generous aspect. I mean, you have lots of things going on. When you give somebody your attention, you're being very generous. So universal language, it's not personality, it's not about skills and experience, it's not about education and training, it's not a measure of intelligence, it's not really even personal values and beliefs. DISC is really about how people prefer to do things. What are their preferences? And we all have preferences. They're all a little bit different, but everybody has a primary preference. Everybody has a primary style. It's the one you run to when there's a little stress or a little tension or a little fatigue or a little tiredness. It's inherently comfortable. It's your most comfortable place. That's where we all go when it hits the fan. Thanks, guys.